Stop scrolling through endless photo galleries looking for something to paint. I found a brilliant way to get unlimited painting subjects, and I'm going to show you exactly how it works in this video. So here's the thing. Walking videos on YouTube, there's loads of them, and they're an absolute goldmine for painters. Just think about it. Someone else has done all the hard work for you. They've gone out finding beautiful locations and filming everything for you. And you can just sit at home with your cuppa and pause the video whenever you want to. And there could be something fantastic to paint. In this full-length watercolor tutorial then, I'm sort of collaborating with a YouTuber called Dave's Walks. And Dave creates these wonderful walking videos that I have used a few times before, and they're packed with loads of different painting subjects. His videos are slow, we're at walking pace, obviously, slow and steady, so you can really see everything clearly, and it's pretty close to being there yourself without the need for travel, of course. For this painting, I watched his Mevagissey walk in Cornwall, a lovely, beautiful, typical Cornish harbour scene, perfect harbour scene with boats and reflections and buildings and that gorgeous Cornish light. There's hundreds of potential subjects just in this video alone. Let me just go full screen here and I'll show you what I mean. So if I go forwards a little bit more, we're coming up the side of the harbour here. So of course we can stop wherever we want to. We can go backwards and forwards. Obviously in YouTube you use the left arrow and right arrow to go back, forwards and so on. I know some of you might be thinking this is a little bit of cheating somehow. I don't really think so. It's just a modern way of gathering reference material. Artists have always used whatever tools they had available. And now we've got these brilliant walking videos, and I think we should use them. Always, of course, get the permission of the creator, and I've got permission from Dave to use his walking videos, and certainly my Patreon group have full access and are able to use these videos for some painting inspiration. Yep, so we are in Mevagissey Harbour. Let me just fast forward to a scene where I think there would be a nice, suitable composition. We're coming up to it now. That, I think, is my view to paint. It's got lovely blues in the water, warm tones on the quayside on the left, the characteristic Cornish buildings in the background. We've got the end of the harbour over there. I'll put a full link to Dave's full Mevagissey walk in the description. So we've got an assortment of boats as well, beautiful reflections. I think I might put a figure on that left-hand side. We've got these cars on the left. Let me just go back to... Let me go back to... here. Yeah, those cars on the left, they're not really doing anything for me. So I'm going to put a figure in there, an assortment of boats as well. We can obviously leave out some. I quite like that boat there in the middle, this fishing boat here. And the row of boats, sort of like the quayside, they're leading us into the composition. We've got those boats there leading us in as well. Some nice sort of lead in of those boats, that one pointing the right way as well. Bit of perspective to deal with the quayside. We're contre jour. We're looking into the light, which is always good from a watercolor point of view. We've got silhouetted shapes and nice contrasts of lights and darks. Quite a simple sky as well. So let's get started. Paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford cold press, 15 inches by 11 inches. So being cold pressed, it's got that sort of medium texture, not too rough, and taped down at the sides. So I'll cover my paints later on when I get to the painting stage. But first of all, the all-important drawing stage, making marks for those main objects, starting with that on that left-hand side, those buildings at the end of the harbour, we've got the harbour wall, a sort of straightish edge, fairly horizontal, not too difficult. Then below that, we've got the actual side of the harbour itself, the harbour walkway, the promenade around the end of the harbour there. We've got the quayside going down the left-hand side as well. Bit of a sort of kink in it, but wide enough. That quayside on the left-hand side, wide enough so it sort of looks like it belongs in the painting, but not too narrow. Otherwise, it would just look a little bit weird being a sort of thin strip on that left-hand side. So just make it, if you're going to have a go at this scene, try and make it just try and get the right balance of the width of that side. Now, these boats, going to have to try and simplify them. There's loads of boats in the actual source photo, and I need to just concentrate on the main boat. So here's this fishing boat right in the middle that I thought was pointing the right way, in the right direction, pointing towards those buildings on the left, and it's got quite a sort of complex tarpaulin covering on the back. Quite a simple cabin though. And then beyond that, at the end of the harbour, just in front of the harbour wall, we've got some simpler boats. We've just got some simpler shapes to deal with. The tops of the boats, they're different hulls. I need to try and make sure the hulls, the waterline of the hulls, they're all kind of all in line. So we've got that, the appearance of the row of boats there. It's also a good idea to try and connect a few of them as well. So some are isolated, some are connected. They're all close together up there. Different heights of boats as well. So little higher one here on the right hand side. There's a bit of a sort of higher cabin that's just catching the light on that right one. Now, tucked away in the corner, there's one that's got like a blue tarpaulin cover over it, or it actually looks quite light against the light. And also what I'm trying to do with the drawing is establishing what are going to be the light areas in the scene. Those tarpaulins, the tops of the boats catching the light. And then when I get to the painting stage, carefully paint around those. I'm going to try and leave those as the paper unpainted to get those extra bright lights. Coming towards us, going down to that bottom right corner, there's 3 larger boats. Or actually, I think in the source photo, there's actually 4, but the middle 2, they kind of almost gel together. So I'm going to make it 3 boats coming down, as I say, to that bottom right-hand corner, all connected with each other, and trying to make them appear different shapes, different bits and pieces inside the boats as well. There's 2 bluish ones and a whitish one, and that there's a sort of mast at a funny angle. I'm not sure if I'm going to put it at that angle or have more of a traditional vertical mast. Anyway, nearest boat, and I generally find with boats, looking at boats at this angle, the far side of the boat is almost a straight line. And then the near side of the boat, that's where you get that curve, particularly at the front end, the bow. And then it sort of sweeps around and the curve becomes a little bit less towards the back of the boat, the stern. And then trying to get the waterline right as well with the height of the boat, trying to get those proportions right. Of course, boats always look a little bit more boat-like when they've got bits of paraphernalia on top of them, like those buoys, or these circular fenders rather. And masts, also rigging can help. I'll probably not draw in all of the rigging, but just getting those main boat shapes, concentrating on looking down the height of Dave when he took this video, the height of a figure looking down on those boats, that kind of funny angle. There are some boats also just on that left-hand side between my three key boats and the corner of the harbour, so just a few in there. I think there's actually 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 in the source photos. I've got 4 in there. Of course, with perspective, the boats are going to be a lot smaller in the distance. There's my strengthening up of the water's edge as well. Straighten up these lines, keep the buildings fairly simple in the background. I quite like the light that's hitting the white building, the light on the right-hand side of the roof. That's quite attractive against the darker roof facing us and the darker building beyond it. Figure on the quayside, just sort of making it up. And when I come to the painting stage, I'll sort of follow those lines, and I'll include my trademark dog as well. A few extra lines to help with the perspective. To strengthen up some of these lines here on the buildings, try and get those right. Especially important, getting the lines right on the skyline as well, because I don't want any, because the sky is quite light, I don't want any or unnecessary pencil lines going into that sky area. Right, drawing done, on to the painting then. Now the paints I'm using are professional grade paints from Mark Jackman. Again, links in the description to his paints and a little bit of discount for you if you want to try them out. Painting wise, I'm going to, you can see I've just pre-wetted the top part of the sky area with a sponge, a soft sponge. I don't want to damage the surface of the paper, so you could use a flat brush, of course, but an even layer of water just to dampen that area so we get a nice smooth wash. And then some yellow ochre in the sky, but keeping it quite light, thinking about the values of that sky. So I'm not going to leave it bright white paper, but just sort of dull it down, just darken it just a tiny, tiny bit with this fairly light wash. So yellow ochre first. Let me go through the paints I've got in this one. My normal palette of colours. Starting from the top, neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, which you can see I just picked up there. Then I've got yellow ochre, spring green, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, light red or English oxide, then cadmium orange, cadmium yellow. Along the bottom I've got lavender, quinacridone gold, Naples yellow, and a white gouache in the bottom right hand corner. Right, burnt sienna, burnt umber. The quayside on the left again has got to be quite light, darker than the sky, but quite light, and that's the big area of warmth in the scene, that warm air against the cools of the buildings and particularly the water in the harbour. So I've also added in a little bit of blue, a little bit of coolness on the harbour side as well, just to sort of try not to make it too flat and looking stone-like as well. Now I'm adding in a little bit of blue into the sky. Might have gone a bit too strong with this, so I can lift out if I feel it's too dark or too strong. Still want to keep things nice and light, but I think that in that sky, the subtle warms and cools in there can actually make for a more interesting sky. It's quite a large area in the overall composition. It's sort of about a third of my overall area. So I've got to either put in clouds or just add a little bit of variety into that sky area with the yellow ochre mixed with that very weak blue mixture. Right, continuing with this blue mixture, carefully paint around those boats in the distance. This is just me covering the paper. I'm just covering the paper here, trying to get rid of all this white space, apart from, of course, the highlights on the boats. This will be a lot darker when I go in with the dark shadows. We're looking into the light, the dark shadow, the dark shaded wall of the harbour wall and the quayside on the far side. The water of the harbour in the distance starts quite light. You can see how light it is with the gap between the buildings and the harbour wall on the right hand side. You can see a little bit of a gap there, so you can see how light it is, and a gap. Also gap just to the left and the right of the fishing boat in the middle. So keep it fairly light. And then coming quite dark as I come further down. Now I can, with this light blue mixture, I can go over the sides of the boats because they're going to be darker. So I'm going over the side of the boats and continue on down, carefully painting around the tops of those three boats there. And the actual top of the boat, it's not a straight line. Well, I drew in a straight line, but just introduce a few little kinks, which could be bits and pieces actually on the edge of that boat. A lot darker then, coming down, thicker mixture. And we go significantly darker in the bottom right hand corner. So light at the top, coming darker down, painting around those three boats. And those first two boats are going to be blue anyway, so I can easily paint over those, front and the back of the boat. My nearest boat is going to be white, so I could actually leave that out. Ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, a lot darker in this bottom section. And the actual brush strokes, brush I'm using, by the way, is a Tintoretto mop brush. I think you need a good mop brush with a nice edge to it and a nice point. And this one it's a synthetic brush, really, actually very cheap brush, but ideal for painting water like this and laying down a wash. Of course, it will dry lighter, so you need to think about that when you're going in here. You want it quite dark in that bottom right-hand corner, but not too dark, because with the reflections, we want those reflections to stand out. So those three nearest boats, for example. And this kind of motion with my brush is trying to, we've got sort of subtle areas of it being a little bit darker and softer areas as well. So we're creating that little bit of movement in the water. There's just a bit of gentle movement in the water, creating some very soft waves. You look at the source photo, you can see that from particularly the halfway point, just this side of the fishing boat, you can just begin to see some of those very soft waves appearing. I've swapped brushes now to a Princeton long round. brush, and again it's got a good point to it, but going in at a sort of horizontal level, and the paint now is a lot thicker in consistency. Now you've got to do a bit of practicing on your timing here, going wet and wet. What I'm trying to do is create enhance some stronger waves in this water, in this nearby water. So you just got to be a bit careful with the timing. You go in too quick, then it all kind of spreads out a bit too much with the damp paper. You go in too late, then you get hard edges. So you just got to judge it right. And I can see already that some of them are moving just a little bit too much, but they will go, of course, they will go a little bit lighter as it dries. So I'm waiting here to, I think is a good time to add in these darker waves. And a good idea is to look at the painting against the light, and you can see it still sort of shiny while the surface is still wet. And then as it's drying a little bit, it loses that shine. So that could be also, depending on the water to paint ratio of what you've got on your brush, that could dictate, how fast the actual paint sort of seeps into the surface and what kind of edge you're going to get. Now I'm using a little bit of light board here just to fan the surface. If you used a hairdryer, that might be a little bit too severe to speed up the drying process, but sometimes just wafting it with a lightweight board there can actually assist in drying the surface, so I can start painting again, but not drying it too quickly. Just do a little bit of a test down here. It's always a good idea also when you're adding in these darker waves to use the same combination of colors that you used for the water in the first place, the sea color in the first place. I find that if you change, you add in some other color, maybe a different brown, maybe you use burnt umber with the ultramarine blue for the dark water, then all of a sudden you change to a burnt sienna rather than burnt umber, it can produce some weird effects, and the paint sort of splits, and you can get some nasty sort of brownish edges to it. So you've got to watch out for that. Try and keep to the same color combination. A little bit more wafting with the board, fairly close to the surface as well. Just a little bit of final wafting around, and then start again to add in these little horizontal waves, and with the brush at a sort of 45-degree angle, trying to create those elliptical shapes and trying to get a soft edge as well. Now, some areas of the paper, for example there, they've dried just a little bit too much, so I've got a hardish edge which I might need to just lift off. Generally horizontal, these marks, and try and connect a few of them as well so they're not all sort of on their own. The marks in the distance will be narrower and they need to be a little bit lighter as well, so I'm going to have to lift off those. They look a little bit too dark. Larger marks in the foreground. The area below, I don't need to bother the area below the end boat, the nearest boat there, because that's going to have the reflection of that boat, so that would sort of obliterate any soft waves I put in there. With a paper towel, then I'm just lifting off a few of those soft waves and a bit of a horizontal drag of that tissue just to get that softness back again. Now it's time for the dark. So I've sort of completed my initial step, the covering of the paper, the sky, the quayside on the left, the water and some of those soft waves. Now the darks, and things should start to magically appear, and we're getting the shapes. We're defining those main shapes a bit more. We're getting a bit more impact into the painting and defining these different areas. I need to make sure the sky is absolutely dry, so I have used my hairdryer here to speed up the process. Need to make sure it's absolutely dry to get these hard edges now. Starting from the left, then I've got a darkish building, then a lighter building. It's white paint, but it's in the shade because we've got the light coming towards us, so it's a sort of middle value. So start off on the left hand side, leave just a few lights here and there. There's a window right in the middle of that darkish building, so that's it there. Leave a few sort of horizontal lights. There's containers and things at the very end there, and just as I come down with those darks, there's a couple of boats or things at the very end of the quayside here that's silhouetted against the darkness of the background building. The harbour walk comes down to those boats in that corner. Let's get in this roof of the white building first of all, and that leaving out on the right hand side that sort of triangle of light, which I think is quite attractive against the darker building beyond it. So that's that near edge. And then the darker building beyond, starting from the edge of the roof of the white building. There's a sort of bit beyond the end building, and then we've got the quite a simple triangular roof of this end building and a simple chimney as well. Leave out a few lights here and there, which could be windows and different objects catching the light. So I don't need to completely cover the paper for these buildings. I could leave just a few lights, particularly on the right hand side where there's some windows there that could be catching the light. A blue now for the white building. Cerulean blue, just really adding to that mixture I had for the dark water in the foreground. That white building, I've gone a tiny bit darker at the base, so lighter at the top, when in fact the roof has just sort of merged in with the white of the wall there. That doesn't matter too much. It's in the background. The main thing is that this triangle of light on the right hand side of that roof. And then defining some nice shapes for these buildings at the end, keeping them really simple though. they're in the background. We don't need to put a lot of detail into these. This is the front of the white building. Back to the building beyond, going a bit darker. There's a bit of glare on my paper from the lights there. Apologies for that, but when this dries, you'll see how dark it is, that building on the right hand side. Down to the base, there's what looks like picnic benches or something like that on the quayside, just to the right or below those buildings. But I might actually suggest those with a little bit of paint towards the end, or leave in some horizontal lights. Now down to the harbour walls. And I need to go fairly warm with these and quite dark as well. These are darker areas of the overall composition. Right, this end harbour wall, yeah, quite dark, quite warm, but it's got some cool in there. There's sort of bluish boxes or containers right at the bottom of these walls that is giving us a bit of cool against the warmth. So I'll go in with those later on, but first we're getting in the base colour for this harbour wall. And then below that, there's going to be some light. Now, there isn't light in the source photo, but I think it'd be quite nice to continue this sort of horizontal line, a strong horizontal line of light hitting the quayside on that far side. So just defining the profile of the shady side of the wall, bit of blue over the right hand side. And then the continuation of the harbour wall, burnt sienna, burnt umber, leaving a few little slithers of horizontal light here and there. But coming down to the tops of these boats. Connect the buildings with the harbour wall at the end. Bit of lavender for the furthest building. There's a very small building right at the end. Not sure what building it is. Maybe it's the harbour master or something like that. Right at the end there, just silhouetted against the sky. Perhaps a couple of figures in that gap there as well, just to have some more distant figures, giving a sense of scale and the depth as well. Right, burnt sienna, burnt umber. Let's continue the harbour wall just below the quayside there, and cutting around the tops of the boats. Now you don't need to be too precise with this, with these shapes. You can always, at the end, if they don't look quite right, we can always go in at the end with a little bit of white paint just to strengthen up the tops of these cabins and so on of the different sorts of boats. But we are defining here by cutting around these shapes. We're defining the cabins and the distance, if you like, between these boats. There we are, the distance between the boats. So I need a brush with a good edge here. And it's also a good idea to keep this quite damp, this little sort of band I'm putting here quite damp, because right afterwards, after I've laid in this dark harbour wall, I'm gradually working my way down the paper from top to bottom, and generally, me being right-handed, generally left to right. But we want to then continue on with the reflections, which are a little bit lighter, but they're kind of merged with the shady side of the wall, and then the reflection starts. It's very difficult to see, or at least I can't see in the source photo in the still image I took from Dave's video, where I could see the waterline. So it's almost like one shape in a way, but quite dark with the harbour wall. Well, darker where the waterline might be, but then it goes lighter, goes a little bit lighter with the reflections. Painting around the fishing boat now with that taller cabin. There it is there. So I've got that light now on the far quay side. Over to the right hand side, and then keep things fairly abstract on that right hand side. Nothing in too much detail. I want the main focus to be in that kind of middle area where we've got these row of boats leading the eye into the scene, and then that fishing boat in the middle. Do need to try and do a good job on that one. Now I'm getting in the hulls of these fire boats, which are generally a sort of, well, they're not as dark as the harbour wall, but a light bluey grey, if I could describe it like that. To me, there's some blues in there, there's some white boats, but they're in the distance, so they're going to be a little bit dark. But I need to create the shape of the hull as well. We've got the backs of the cabins, also a similar colour to the hulls. We'll go in later on with a bit of detail, doors, outboard motors, fenders and so on, but this is just getting in the shady side of the sides of the boats and the cabins. Keep that one. Keep the cabin of that boat white, and then just continue on with these hulls of the end boats. Pretty much all the same value, same colour. Right, reflection time. I've got this cobalt green and viridian green. I think a combination of that will make for a pleasing colour for these shadows. These reflections. So think about that green and also the value of these reflections, and then I'm sticking with the same brush. I could have gone back for these reflections here, I could have gone back to that Princeton long round. That would have been a good brush as well, but generally with a pointed brush and horizontal marks, creating these sort of elliptical waves, but more solid up towards the far end, the far side, and then coming down to where the fishing boat is. That's where we start to see a little bit more sky appearing and a bigger gap between these reflections. I'm connecting then the reflections with the damp side of the hulls, and there you can see just a few horizontal reflections with a bit of a gap of the sky between them. Cobalt green, viridian green, let's continue on the right hand side. Connect with the hulls. All the way over to the right, over the tape on the right hand side. And then Also trying to get, the other thing here is trying to get the right amount of paint on your brush, not too much. It's sort of, I guess, not fully loaded, but half loaded, not too dry, not too wet. Otherwise, when you touch the paper, it's just going to go, the paint's just going to go suddenly out of your brush. You've just got to practice it a little bit, and then you get these just gently again touching the paper at a sort of 45-degree angle with the edge of the brush. We create these little elliptical marks, quite narrow, not too thick, and as sort of horizontal as I can make them. I have a few, some very smaller ones out here in the middle, just a few, but closer together, going towards those boats. Close up some of the gaps. Define the edge, going up to the edge of my middle fishing boat there. That will actually be lighter, that fishing boat in the middle. The hull of that boat will be lighter. With a flat brush here, a soft flat brush, I'm just creating some of the reflections by lifting off some of the paint. So I'm sort of going over the water's edge, but creating those soft or lighter and softer reflections of the lighter boats, particularly on that right-hand side. When you look at the source photo, you can see that quite a lot with those boats on the right-hand side, that those long vertical shapes. And I think that's a good way of achieving that, is going in with those reflections, then lifting off with a soft flat brush. Now for the cabin of that middle fishing boat, a dark brown for this, keeping the light of the top of the cabin, just extending a little bit beyond the cabin up to the front of the boat, and then continuing round to the back. I'm just really simplifying. There's some sort of tarpaulin cover over this boat, or what looks like a tarpaulin cover at the back of the cabin, but I've just kept it just all one kind of shape. And then a lighter blue for the hull of that boat, and then in with the reflection straight away. That's generally the process I like to do for these harbour boats, particularly when we're looking against a light like this, is paint in the boats and then quickly paint in the reflection, connecting the reflection with the side of the boats. And then afterwards, when everything is fairly dry, you can then go in with a smaller, darker brush just to define the water's edge a little bit more. You will see most boats in the harbour scene, particularly the lighter boats, you'll see like a dark line along the water's edge where there's darker paint. And that is another feature that makes them a lot more boat-like. A dark line there and a dark line across the top of the boat, and then those the fenders along the boat as well, and all the other bits and pieces. Continuing then with these other boats, more of a sort of yellowish boat here in the middle. And it's got in the source photo, there's a sort of yellow buoy just connecting these two together, but a yellowish one first of all, and then these boats along the side, or a couple of boats here on the side. So there's these four smaller boats before the three bigger boats. And they're sort of angled in towards the left-hand side a bit. And then their reflections again, cobalt green, viridian green, burnt umber, a little bit of burnt sienna as well if you want to go, sorry, a little bit of neutral tint to go in a little bit darker with those reflections. And you can see there how I'm connecting with the actual hull of the boat. Then this yellowish one here. And that yellow paint, it probably won't in this case, but that yellow paint, if there was enough of it, that would then seep down into the reflections, so we get a little bit of a yellowish colour seeping into the reflection of the yellow boat. Then the final reflection there of that boat up to the edge of the, defining a nice hard edge against the harbour wall. Right, a dark blue then for these two boats of the three, starting with the far one and painting around the middle boat. So front and back, down to the water's edge, and then the middle boat. Maybe just leave a little bit of a light gap at the front, just where the light is catching the front of that boat. And go a bit darker towards the bottom of the boat as well. So fairly light at the top and then go a little bit darker down towards the water's edge. And then the nearest one is what I think is a whitish boat. So I need to go fairly light with that. Let's get in first of all, while the sides of the boats are still damp, let's get in the reflections on these first two. Sort of a zigzag motion down the scene. And then boat number 2 as well. Just starting the water start to look a little bit more water-like now with those reflections. So the hull of this last boat, a bit of lavender, but lighter than the other two boats. Trying to create this as a lightish boat in the shade. Paint around these fenders, the two red fenders, and there's one at the end, but that's going to be dark against the lighter water. Up to the end. And you can see there's just a little bit of paint there accumulating on the water's edge, which is good because then when I go in with the darker, thicker colour for the reflections, that's going to bleed in. I'm going to get a nice soft edge, nice soft transition from the light of the boat to the darker reflections. And it will just happen ever so slowly. And just let it do its thing. Cobalt green, viridian green, and a little bit of an edge to the reflection as well. A straightish edge as it comes out from the boat, and then as it comes towards us, a little bit more exaggerated. A few little wayward marks in the water. And then that's going to be the reflection of the fender on the end, yet to be painted. Next, I'll paint the insides of the boats. I've got the figure to do, and we're slowly moving into more of the detail phase of the painting now. So actually in the source photo it's a little bit lighter, the shady side of this boat compared to the hull, the inside of the boat compared to the hull. I've gone a bit dark, but it doesn't matter. That kind of just pushes the contrast a bit more. And all I can say is just look at the shape of that reflection. Squint your eyes, and we're cutting around some of the horizontal areas of the boat, the flatter areas of the boat, like the seats or the top of the engine, I guess where the engine is, a storage box or something like that. And the bits and pieces at the end of the quayside on the left looks like some boats upside down, some smaller boats upside down, or resting on some kind of support. Figure then, simple figure on the left hand side. Roughly following my initial drawing, trying to get a sense of movement, and a fairly darkish figure, a dark clothed figure, and then getting in the shadow below it, and a dog. With figures, I generally, when I come to the legs, I try and get in one leg first of all, and then think what would be the position of the other leg to make the overall figure look all right and not sort of awkward. That's the way I generally do it. So I don't often do a lot of detail to the legs. Try and do them as quickly as possible. The more time I spend doing legs on a figure, the more sort of static they look and a little bit, as I say, a bit awkward. Right now, connecting the shadow with the figure, just like with the boats, when I do the side of the boats and then the reflections, try and do it all as one, and then put in the dog without it looking like again with dogs, I find if I spend too much time doing them, they end up looking like pigs or something not dog-like. So do that as quickly as possible. Just a simple shape, the tail up at the back, and then try and get in the head right. Simple legs and a shadow. So I've got a smaller brush now and something darker, thicker. This flat brush, trying to get in these windows on this white building, and the doorway as well. Longer mark. That certainly makes that a little bit more building-like with those strong rectangular shapes. Back to my smallish round brush just to find a little bit more some of the details below the roof. And then the boats, as I said before, the line across the top of the boat, the edge of the boat, and then the water's edge, they suddenly look a little bit more boat-like. You don't want to go too dark with these lines. That could make them stand out just a little bit too much. So just judge it right, but something quite dark. And then little bits and pieces on the boats as well, like an outboard motor there. This is so far in the distance. It's just a little tiny black square there, or a little tiny black rectangle, and it suddenly, or hopefully, looks like an outboard motor on a distant boat. This is where I can actually, when I did the harbour wall and I was cutting around those boats, if I want to try and, for example, the curve of the boats at the end, if it wasn't quite right, I can then just sort of emphasize that and just tidy that up with this smaller brush here at this stage. Crimson. So I'm just looking at the photo. Well, I'm constantly looking at the photo for a little bit of inspiration as regards what marks to make, where to make them, the kind of shape of those as well. There's not much water on my brush here. It's quite a dry brush mark. Tiny little windows for that white cabin. Just define this boat now a little bit more. So we've got the top dark band along the edge of the boat, and then the darker water line. Lift off with my fingers if I want to soften up that edge a little bit. Now get in the inside of these middle boats with a sort of opaquish, greyish colour. And that defines them a little bit more, rather than gives the feeling of a hollow boat, doesn't it? Rather than just being a kind of boring shape. And with these boats, you need to, the thwarts or the seats in the middle of the boat, you want to try and paint around those as well with a shadow colour, like that one there, just in the middle. Quite a simple boat, that one. Maybe a little bit darker as well. A little bit darker towards the end of the boat, or the bottom of those shady areas as well, just to give the feeling of the sort of depth of the inside, if you can. Right, now these three boats are a little bit more tricky. There's so much going on there, especially the middle boat. That's got lots of sort of pulleys and cylinders and rigging and so on it. You just got to try and simplify it. Dark band across the top there. And then this middle boat, the inside of it, bit of lavender. See what that does. Just think of some key sort of abstract shapes within that boat, and hopefully it looks boat-like. And then the nearest boat has got a little bit of a dark edge to the inside of the boat at the top. Of course, dark line at the top of the boat as well. And it's got another one a little bit, sort of halfway between the top and the bottom of the boat. A few lines there just to around that container. A few marks inside the boat where, well, it's the bottom of the boat. And some short verticals. This is quite an important bit to what we're doing here is quite an important bit to get right. These little details on those boats, trying to make them a little bit more boat-like. So spend a bit of time trying to observe the scene and squint your eyes, stand back or look at the image in a smaller scale just to try and simplify what you see within those three boats. Burnt umber, neutral tint, and we're getting a vertical there that's on the harbour wall. And then trying to get right the mast of boat number one of the three. Try and get in that mast. And a broken line, so if you can't draw a long continuous line, then that's my trick for doing a long mast like that. Just have a few gaps in there. Do a little gap, do a little line first of all, leave a gap, then another line, gap, which could be where the light is catching that mast, and it's just sort of like a lost and found line, as they say. And my narrower flat brush here, and we'll just emphasize some of the gaps between the boats with a soft vertical reflection, just drag it down from the harbour wall. This brush is about quarter of an inch in width, so it's quite narrow. Strengthen up some of those lines as well, the details on those four middle boats. And then when you add things into boats, always think about whether you want to put in the reflection of that object, like the outboard motor or fenders. Just think about the reflection as well, just to continue. Again, making them a bit more boat-like, floating in water. Right, these fenders then, they're sort of pinkish on that fishing boat, or like a light red. So I'm picking up my cadmium red, I'm mixing it with some white gouache, so I'm getting a fairly opaque-ish light sort of, well, a pinkish, opaque-ish colour, which I can continue around. I saw a bit of red on that, on the first of the three nearest boats. Painting these two fenders as well. with this small brush. Maybe just leave just a little bit of light at the top, and then a darker one down the end of the boat. And then that middle line, connecting those two fenders, go right to the back of the boat. It's a slightly lightish line compared to the top. There's a little line, I think it's a bit of rope or something, just dangling down, halfway down that boat, down to the water's edge. Now for some lines on the quay side, just to create those sort of the joints in the quay side, and then particularly on the edge here, it comes wider down towards the foreground, so that's going to help with the perspective of the scene as well. And some areas are darker, where there's a little sort of crack in the surface or a little depression. So that just adds a bit more interest to that surface. And a few little lines there on the side again to help with the creation of those different sort of slabs, I guess, on the edge. There's what looks like the top of a ladder or steps on the harbour wall there on the side of the quay. That's just sort of protruding up. So I used a bit of gouache there just to go in a little bit lighter on top of the darker background, make that show up. Get in another darker mask there, just that sort of balances up, I think, quite nicely the two on the left. Now with some white gouache and a smaller brush, this is a bit like the icing on top of the cake, just adding a few highlights here and there. Don't overdo it with the white gouache. So some little white fenders, for example, on those distant boats. A few little bits of highlight catching those pinkish fenders on the middle fishing boat. Highlighting on the shoulder of the figure, and window frames. Now be careful with white window frames. I find if you overdo it, it just makes them stand out a little bit too much. In fact, my white frames, it almost looks like a Cornish flag in a way, against the darker background. But yeah, so don't overdo it with the white frames on a window. Just particularly background buildings or buildings far away like that, it just attracts too much attention to me. We want to push them back. Right, just a few more white lines here and there. Need to strengthen up the front of the fishing boat here, particularly against that darker background. Connect with the white paint just a few of these boats, some sort of horizontal structures here and there. a lead for the dog, perhaps might be a good idea. I'm not sure if dogs are allowed off their lead in the area, but anyway, some white edging to the tops of the ladder there just makes that show up a bit more. Right, so my Lebanson brush, rigger brush, I can get some exceptional thin lines with this. Now with white gouache, you need to be careful with the mixing. For example there, my brush is a little bit too dry. It takes a bit of practice to get the right consistency of white paint or white gouache paint to water. Too dry and then you end up with like a dry brush mark, like a few of those masks were. This is better now. We've got a thinner consistency because more water in it. Don't go too watery though, otherwise you end up with a thicker line and it goes sort of milky, a sort of milky cloudy colour, and it dries. With the white gouache, it will dry when you add water. It will dry a little bit darker as well. Define a few of these distant cabins a little bit more, just strengthen those up. A rope or two connecting the boats to the harbour side to strengthen up some of the sides of the boats, bits and pieces in these three boats here. Again, if you look at the source photo, you see little objects catching the light, some angular rails or something sticking out the back of the boat. I'm not sure exactly what they are, but just to add those in so the boats don't look too boring. A bit more over here on the left. Some little bits and pieces on the quay side as well. Could be little stones or chippings catching the light. Need to get in the lettering of the boats, also a little bit more definition to some of the buildings at the end there. Let's get some ropes dangling down from the front of these three boats and then their reflections as well. And then now this is the reflection of that taller, not the tallest mast, and more bits and pieces sticking out the back, a vertical bit there on the end boat. Define the tops of those fenders a bit more and their connection to the side of the boat. And another bit of rope or whatever dangling from that nearby boat. Little vertical there. Now there's another sort of post or something. Maybe it's the side of a ladder. I'll play the video. I'll go forward on the video to see exactly what that was. Again, the walking videos, they do give you a bit more clue. If you can't really work something out, then you can always go forwards or go backwards and zoom in, of course, just to get a bit more information on what you're trying to paint. Right, the tallest building at the end there, in the background there, it's got a couple of lightish horizontal bands, not too white, but a sort of opaquish greyish white, if you like. We've got the picnic tables there highlighted at the end. Yes, I need to get in the writing of the lettering of the boats, the letters and the numbers of these smaller fishing boats. Now, you might want to draw these in if your letter writing skills are not up to it. If you want to make sure they kind of laid out right and you've got enough space. So I'm just going in freehand, which should be all right. So FH339 for that first boat. Now the other two blue boats, one's got dark letters on a white background, the other one's got white letters on a dark background. I'll just go with dark on both of them. Something simple, they're a little bit further away, can't make them out. Connect the boat to the fishing boat there. Bottom of the fenders, just a little bit of soft shading underneath those, not too hard an edge. And lift off with the fingers. Some more dark objects protruding out of that end boat, and we're done. And my normal little self-critique at the end of the video. So thanks again to Dave's Walks for your lovely walking video of Mevagissey Harbour and beyond. I certainly will be having a go at the other videos as well. There's loads up there from Dave. Countryside walks through quaint UK villages as well. The Isles of Scilly recently. Yeah, there's some brilliant stuff up there. So I'll certainly be having a go at some of those. And so back to this one then, Mevagissey Harbour, Cornish, right at the end of the harbour there. We browsed through Dave's Walks there. We found an appropriate scene at the, I think it was 13 minutes and 42 seconds, if my memory serves me right. And we've got the framing on the left-hand side of the quayside. I ignored those cars, but then right out in front of us, we've got the harbour wall. Cornish, as I say, producing some nice effects of silhouetted shapes, the tops of the boat catching the light, and reflections as well, trying to think about the connection of the reflections with the boats, the values also, the values of the darker harbour wall showing up against these slightly lighter boats, trying to think also, going back to composition, the layout of these boats in the harbour scene. So you can always move things around. There were, for example, some boats. There was a couple of boats between those far boats there and this fishing boat. In Dave's video, there were a couple of boats in there, but I think that would have made for a bit of a jumbled scene. And also on the right-hand side, there was a boat coming in there, and there was actually, depending on where you stop the video, there's another boat kind of in that area there, which I omitted, but quite happy with the result. I included the figure as well. Also very useful to have a figure in there for scale and a little bit of interest. Could be a focal point as well. So thanks for watching. Thanks very much, Dave, and I'll catch up with you soon on the next video. Bye-bye.